faithfully delivering value and interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Club. Today, I'm going to introduce you to this book called Emotional Blackmail. It's a psychology bestseller that's been popular worldwide for 20 years. Hmm. Many people don't realize they might be experiencing emotional blackmail. Emotional blackmail is a form of soft violence in relationships. It can happen between family, partners, friends, or colleagues, and it's often very subtle. Like, your partner might say, "If you really loved me, you'd do what I want." Your parents might say, "After all I've done for you, why won't you listen?" Or your friend might say, "We've known each other so long, why can't you help me?" The hidden message in all these is, if you care about me, you'll give in to me. You keep compromising, but each time leaves you more exhausted. Oh, that's when you should watch out. You might be getting emotionally blackmailed. Dr. Susan Forward, author of Emotional Blackmail, is a renowned American psychologist and best-selling author with over 20 years of therapy experience who's helped many overcome emotional struggles. That book, Obsessive Love, we covered before. Yeah, that's her work too. This Emotional Blackmail book, it hit #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, had 8 reprints, and got translated into 20 languages. Even the famous writer Liang Windao recommended it. In this book, Susan uses vivid real-life cases to reveal how emotional blackmail works and shows us how to break free from it. All right, I'll break this down into 3 parts for you. First, what exactly is emotional blackmail? How does it actually play out? Second, why do people get trapped in it? Third, how should we respond to emotional blackmail? Okay, let's dive into part 1. What emotional blackmail is and how it operates. Simply put, it's a powerful manipulation tactic. When conflict arises between close people, one exploits the other's vulnerabilities to threaten them. They demand things go their way, insist on sacrifices, and punish any resistance. In real life, different blackmailers have distinct patterns and methods. The book categorizes them into 4 types: the punisher, the self-punisher, the victim, and the temptress. The punisher is the easiest to spot. Oh, because once you don't comply, they'll show it right away, either by lashing out directly or using the silent treatment. The second type, emotional blackmailers, are self-punishers. They won't get mad at you, but will hurt themselves instead. When faced with rejection, they warn, "If you don't agree, I can't go on living." The third type is called the victim. They don't threaten to hurt others. Instead, they keep hinting all their suffering is caused by the other person. The victim appears fragile on the surface, but is actually a silent tyrant. They exploit others' guilt to force compromise and retreat. The fourth type is the temptress, also one of the 4 types. They're the hardest to spot among emotional blackmailers. Generally, the temptress starts with a sweet promise, then threatens during fulfillment. "If you don't comply, you'll get nothing." The temptress's promises aren't always material. More often, they offer emotional enticement to victims. For example, a close relationship or a loving, supportive family, but the price is total obedience to the temptress. Now that we've covered the types of blackmailers, let's talk about their common tactics. Blackmailers mainly use 4 methods to pressure victims, break their defenses, and make them yield. These 4 methods are dichotomy, pathologizing, united front, and negative comparison. Let's go through them one by one. Dichotomy means the blackmailer takes the moral high ground, paints themselves as good, and pushes the victim to feel bad. A common example is parents saying, "We raised you with difficulty, so you should obey." The blackmailer's second tactic is pathologizing. That is, "If you don't do as I say or follow my advice, you're sick." Over time, this confuses victims into doubting their sanity. For example, parents pushing kids to marry early often say, "Look, everyone's married except you. You must be sick." The blackmailer's third tactic is the united front. Sometimes they feel solo efforts aren't enough, so they bring in allies. For example, the wife wants a divorce, but the husband disagrees. To force the wife to compromise, the husband not only gathers relatives and friends, but also calls both parents for a family meeting to persuade her to change her mind. When people we care about and respect all stand against us, we feel lonely and frustrated, endure more pressure, and eventually compromise. The fourth tactic blackmailers often use is negative comparison, with the most typical phrasing. It's like, look at others, for example. Look at that husband who has a high salary, a good job, does all the housework, takes his wife traveling and shopping during holidays, and then look at you who can't even afford fancy restaurants. People easily develop an inferiority complex when compared. This is how blackmailers make victims feel full of flaws, and unconsciously, they change according to the blackmailer's demands. All right, that covers the content of part one. Emotional blackmail is a form of manipulation. We introduced the four types of emotional blackmailers and their common tactics. It's important to note that the types and tactics aren't fixed. They might be both self-punishers and victims, or use multiple tactics as long as it achieves their goal. Um, so we've covered what emotional blackmail is. Next, we move to part two to discuss why people get trapped in emotional blackmail. According to the book's author, Susan, emotional blackmail isn't a solo act, but a duet. From the blackmailer making demands to the victim yielding, the completion of emotional blackmail is actually a result of cooperation between both parties. Therefore, to properly handle emotional blackmail, one must have a clear understanding of each role involved. First, let's talk about the blackmailer. Regardless of type or tactic, they're essentially using threats to pressure and control the victim into doing what they want. The reason they do this lies in their deep-seated fear of loss. They fear losing their desires, always wanting support, even at the cost of others' interests. And this fear mainly stems from complex upbringing environments. Some blackmailers were overly spoiled since childhood, rarely faced setbacks, so they can't handle rejection as adults. Then there's another group who are the opposite. They often make demands, but rarely get them met. They grew up in an environment lacking love and support. With this lack of security, they're terrified of loss and hypersensitive to setbacks. In either case, to soothe their inner anxiety, fear, and unease, blackmailers pressure victims into compromise. So, in emotional blackmail, it's not about victims doing wrong, it's blackmailers fulfilling their psychological needs. The benefits for blackmailers are obvious, but why would anyone willingly become a victim? Now, let's explore the victim's psychology. The author compares emotional blackmail to fog because it traps people in emotional quicksand, clouding judgment until they act against themselves. Emotional blackmail works largely because of the victim's psychological state. Many wonder, why do even smart, composed people fall victim? Why do they sometimes seem so vulnerable? What makes someone more susceptible to emotional blackmail? The key lies in emotional buttons. These buttons are our innermost vulnerabilities, like locked boxes storing uncomfortable emotions. The book identifies three key buttons: fear, responsibility, and guilt. Fear mainly means dread of abandonment, rejection, or losing love and support, like not receiving parental love or losing friends' backing. Responsibility is our belief that we owe duties to loved ones, with failure bringing guilt. Guilt is that remorse when we violate personal or social ethics as conscientious people. These buttons aren't innate, they're shaped by upbringing, childhood, and education. For example, those poorly parented often develop stronger fears. If parents demanded constant self-sacrifice, we easily shoulder responsibilities that aren't ours. Usually, these emotional buttons aren't triggered. People don't even realize they exist. But once pressed, they dredge up negative memories, making people recall past hurts. This pain clouds judgment, leads to compromise, and over time, forms automatic behavior patterns. Blackmailers exploit this exact vulnerability to control victims' lives. Often, victims compromise to avoid conflict. Surrender brings temporary relief. So they keep meeting demands, obeying orders, believing this preserves relationships. But ironically, victims' compliance rewards the blackmailer's behavior. Initially testing with small demands, blackmailers escalate once successful, repeating tactics on larger issues. Now that we've covered why people get trapped, let's move to part 3, how to respond to emotional blackmail. Breaking free requires 2 keys: changing automatic reactions and disabling emotional buttons. First, let's address changing reactions behaviorally through preparation and SOS tactics. Before confronting blackmailers, victims must prepare using positive self-talk to strengthen resolve. Specifically, try these 3 methods. First method, create rituals, like signing a self-contract, pledging not to let fear, duty, or guilt dictate decisions. Second method, repeatedly declare aloud, I can withstand this. For example, I can withstand others' anger. I can withstand pity plays. I can withstand being misunderstood. This practice implants positive messages into the subconscious. Third method, replace old beliefs with new ones, like changing "they're angry, so my request must be wrong" into new statements like, even though they're angry, my request is valid. By speaking the new statements aloud repeatedly, help your mind accept this new belief. While doing these exercises, imagine yourself facing an emotional blackmailer and dealing with their intense pressure. At this point, try to give yourself more confidence. The preparation is done. Next is the specific method to change automatic reactions, namely the 3 steps mentioned by the author in the book. SOS, the first S stands for stop, meaning to pause. The second O refers to observe, meaning to calmly observe. The final S is step 3, strategize, to develop a strategy. Let's illustrate with an example. For example, a wife who just had a baby has made many sacrifices for the family and always accommodated the child. After having the baby, she eagerly looks forward to returning to work, but her husband wants her to quit and stay home to focus on childcare. She tries to discuss it, but every time he angrily says, I'm working so hard outside for this family. Now I'm asking you to quit. It's to take good care of the baby. Why aren't you willing to do this little thing? So, how should the wife apply the 3 SOS steps to resolve this emotional blackmail? First, stop to buy yourself enough time to regain rationality. When caught in emotional blackmail, victims often feel intense urgency, like they must respond to the blackmailer's demands within a specific time. It's like a ticking clock urging you on. At this moment, the anxious, stressed victim's first priority is to buy time to think. For instance, the wife in the story could respond with phrases like, I can't give you an answer right now. Let me think it over. Quitting is no small matter. It affects the family income. Um, when the child starts school, I need to return to the workforce. It also concerns my career. I can't decide lightly. I need some time to think. Or you could choose to change your environment to ease anxiety. For example, say, I need a drink of water, or I need to use the restroom. I'll be right back. This gives you a chance to change your environment and calm down. After buying time, the victim's second step is to become an observer, calmly observing. Observing what? First, the victim needs to step into the observer role. What exactly does the blackmailer want, and how are they making the demand? Is their tone filled with affection or threatening impatience? What will their reaction be if I don't compromise right away? Second, the victim must observe what they themselves are thinking in response to the demand. What am I feeling? Specifically, which words, actions, or expressions from them trigger that inner discomfort, making me compromise? I would, for example, a wife who gives up her studies for her husband believes his feelings are more important than her own. This belief breeds guilt, making her feel she shouldn't insist on her own ideas. And once the husband scowls or yells, it ignites intense negative emotions in her. To eliminate this negativity, she compromises. When observing your feelings, pay attention to physical reactions. With negative emotions, some blush, some feel back tension, others get stomach churning. Our bodies genuinely reflect emotional responses. As mentioned earlier, victims often get trapped by hidden emotional buttons. To escape, they must first understand their reactions and the triggering beliefs. This helps us view things more objectively, avoiding automatic reaction patterns. After observing the blackmailer and understanding themselves, the victim can begin. Step 3 is strategize. For unimportant demands, you can consciously concede or agree conditionally. But for demands that violate your principles or could harm yourself or others, you should firmly refuse. Of course, it's often harder than imagined because blackmailers are usually close loved ones who know us well. So fighting them requires strategy and skill. The book mainly introduces 4 strategies. The first is called non-defensive communication. Encountering emotional. During blackmail, victims easily become defensive. The book notes that triggered fears, responsibilities, and guilt cause them to resist fiercely. But this defensive reaction often worsens the situation. For example, a mom might use guilt to control her child, but when the child rebels fiercely, do you realize how ridiculous your demand is? Could you stop being so selfish? Such resistance might trigger the blackmailer's emotional outburst, increasing the victim's pressure. Unlike non-defensive communication, by changing our language, we reduce the blackmailer's hostility for smoother communication. If a blackmailer aggressively picks fights or threatens, don't engage, stay clear-headed and firm in your position. Focus on your goal. First, diffuse the tension. For instance, choose a quiet place to sit and talk, listening first to their perspective. After they speak, don't immediately counter. First, validate them. Say, you make good points. Then express your thoughts while they're receptive. Once the blackmailer relaxes, further conversation flows much smoother. The second strategy against blackmailers is turning foes into allies. Rather than opposing them, bring them to your side. Transform their problem into a shared one, e.g., a desperate wife saying, I ache seeing you work so hard to support us. Now with a baby, expenses soared. I don't want to be a stay-at-home mom. It strains our finances, but I do want to care for our child. My brilliant husband, could you help brainstorm alternatives to me quitting? And this shows your stance isn't opposition, but partnership. And now the blackmailer focuses on problem solving, subtly shifting the conflict's focus. The third strategy is conditional exchange. Unlike typical blackmail, where only victims yield, this ensures mutual change. It teaches both parties no game without giving. If you want the other to change, you must change too. For example, if a wife threatens to leave during arguments, the husband could first meet some conditions, like spending more weekend time with the wife and helping with chores. But simultaneously, the husband should request. During conflicts, we solve problems calmly without running away. Conditional exchange is an excellent way to break deadlocks. Both sides compromise. No one feels shortchanged. The fourth strategy against blackmailers is using humor. It's the lubricant for intimacy and eases communication. When you sense emotional blackmail and want to express dissatisfaction, but fear direct confrontation would strain the relationship, you can convey it humorously. For example, when your partner makes an unreasonable request, joke. To prove my sincerity, maybe I should first dance. Okay? For you, little humors in communication dissolve anger, ease tension, and create a relaxed atmosphere for discussion. These methods are quick fixes, teaching behavioral responses to emotional blackmail. But to fundamentally escape it, victims must psychologically disconnect their emotional buttons. First, let's address fear. Victims dread abandonment, rejection, or losing love. The author believes this stems from low self-worth and self-distrust, fearing disapproval and abandonment. So overcoming fear requires rebuilding self-confidence. Here are two practice methods. First, rediscover yourself. List your strengths and qualities, then regularly praise yourself. When you realize you're not as fragile as imagined, you'll find strength to resist blackmail. Second method, scenario replay. If you recently yielded out of fear, reimagine the event. This time, don't yield. Visualize asserting your needs. Imagine their anger while repeating your stance until they relent in your mind. Through this, you'll find voicing thoughts isn't as hard as imagined. Next, let's discuss how to face responsibility and guilt. Responsibility and guilt often stem from distorted perceptions. People aren't born with responsibility. It's learned from parents, schools, and society. Much education glorifies sacrifice as a virtue. So many feel others' needs matter more than their own, and failing to meet them brings intense guilt, even feeling remorse over innocent actions. Thus, addressing responsibility and guilt requires victims to rebuild their belief systems. First, examine your beliefs. Which are others' expectations? Then reevaluate if they're truly reasonable. Are others' judgments facts or just opinions? For example, if someone calls you selfish, don't instantly agree. Ask, am I truly selfish? Or is this just someone's subjective view? Now, concrete methods to change beliefs. First method, reframe statements. If you believe you should abandon everything for family, turn that declaration into a question. And why are their needs more important than mine? Is this belief actually reasonable? Simple as it is, doing this gradually shifts your old thought patterns. Second method, create an emotion box. Write daily negative feelings or criticisms on slips, stash them inside, then trash or burn or bury the box. This ritual trains you to reject undeserved negativity. Third method, paradoxical therapy. Simply amplify negative feelings to absurd extremes, revealing how ridiculous they are. The author gives an example, a girl feeling guilty for initiating a breakup. She imagines telling her boyfriend, I know you can't live without me, and I'll never leave you. For you, I'd abandon all my dreams. After saying it, even she found it absurd. Through this, she saw her guilt was completely unnecessary. All right, we've pretty much covered emotional blackmail here. Now, let me summarize the 3 key points of this book for you. First, emotional blackmail is a powerful manipulation tactic. Emotional blackmailers use threats to pressure victims into compromise instead of giving them free choices. Second, emotional blackmail happens because both the blackmailer and victim play a part. Blackmailers can't handle setbacks. Even small ones trigger their deep fear of loss. To ease their inner anxiety, fear, and unease, they pressure victims to yield. Victims, though, give in because their emotional buttons are pressed, causing intense pain that clouds judgment. Third, when facing emotional blackmail, victims can first use SOS strategies to change automatic reactions. Then they must internally disconnect their emotional buttons psychologically. Actually, emotional blackmail isn't scary. What's truly scary is knowing we're trapped, but refusing to change, even sacrificing ourselves just to please others. But as the author says, only by bravely facing it and changing can we end this manipulation game disguised as love. All right, that's our wrap up of emotional blackmail. The book notes are below the audio. See you tomorrow.